Human beings began to be surprised to realize that it was now possible to enter the world of demons. The barrier that separated the human world from the demon world had been weakened, and they discovered a way to destroy it completely. Faced with this new possibility, the demons began planning an attack on the human world, deciding to send a team of elite heroes to carry out this dangerous mission. Among these heroes was Fried, who, determined, expressed his desire to discuss with his allies the possibility of becoming a member of the elite team. His objective would be to infiltrate the Demon Lord's castle and, if successful, eliminate that powerful and feared demon leader once and for all. While the heroes debated the best strategy, everyone was anxious, pondering the decisions they needed to make. Amid this tension, one of the heroines asked Fried if he would accept such a dangerous mission. She knew he carried a strong sense of justice and thought to herself that he might say something like, "If it's for a world where everyone can live happily, I would accept it without hesitation." This possibility reflected the kind of idealism he demonstrated, but she was still curious to know what his true answer would be. The protagonist's friend, equally determined, also decided that he would join the mission. This friend, who was one of Fried's most talented students, demonstrated courage and loyalty in wanting to participate in this dangerous journey. Even so, the tension between humans and demons went back generations, and everyone knew that those who started the war had long since died. However, despite time, the cycle of violence and hatred persisted. Violence begets violence, the hero reflected, and hatred will never be extinguished as long as this war continues. It was like an endless stream of suffering, from which it seemed impossible to escape. Still, Fried decided that even if there was just a sliver of hope, he was willing to stake his life to put a definitive end to this conflict. On the battlefield, the protagonist found himself in a fierce fight against a formidable opponent. The swords clashed violently, and the two fighters pushed each other to the limit, blow after blow, without ceasing. The protagonist, determined to win, knew he couldn't give up. He had to prevail, as the future of many depended on his victory. However, in a moment of distraction, his student, trying to help him, shouted that he should take another path. But, in the meantime, the protagonist ended up losing his balance and, with that, his advantage in the fight. Meanwhile, a woman, who was watching everything closely, told the protagonist that he was about to die. However, before she could finish her attack, the student begged her to wait. The protagonist, determined to protect his allies, threw himself forward, placing his body as a shield, even though he knew it could cost him his life. The pain was unbearable, but he resisted bravely. The woman, surprised, stated that he was no longer able to wield his own sword. However, the protagonist, with a look of defiance, replied that what he was holding was not just a sword, but something much more powerful. With all his remaining strength, he threw the sword back, revealing it to be a powerful bomb of superior magic. The woman, who was already beginning to activate devastating magic, was taken by surprise by the action of the protagonist, who was determined to change the course of the battle, even if it cost him his own life. And, with a scream of fury, she launched her attack with all her might, screaming for them to die. The student, desperate, shouted that the power of the magic was extremely dangerous and was heading directly towards them. He warned that everyone should prepare immediately, but the protagonist, with a firm look, replied that he would not even hesitate to use himself as a shield if necessary to protect others. At that moment, the protagonist managed to erect a powerful barrier, allowing him to partially dodge the explosion. Despite being hit, the barrier blocked much of the magic, preventing a complete disaster. However, he knew that the situation was still critical. The woman's secret weapon was something terrible, a magic capable of destroying everything around her, and he needed to act quickly to stop her from escaping. Determined not to let her escape, the protagonist activated a new barrier around his student, ensuring that he would no longer interfere in the fight. It was an extreme measure, but necessary. He then used his special ability to try and nullify the woman's magic, and the effect was devastating. A black hole began to form, consuming everything around it. while the protagonist fought to maintain control of the situation. At that moment, he realized that something was happening. The woman, surprised by the turn of events, tried to react, but the protagonist launched a powerful attack, which left her in a critical condition. She, enraged, called them bastards, but that still wasn't enough to stop the hero. He gathered all his strength and, with a final blow, attacked with everything, determined to end the battle once and for all. When the dust settled, the fight was finally over. The woman's body fell to the ground, lifeless, and the student, panting, asked the protagonist if it was really over. The protagonist, still on alert, replied that that demon had a regeneration ability. Before she could recover, he used his magic to seal her soul, preventing any attempt to return. The woman, trembling with fear, saw that her fate was sealed. At that moment, the protagonist reflected on what had happened. Perhaps demons saw humans as invaders, the same way humans saw demons. Even so, he knew that this was a necessary sacrifice for the peace of the world. However, the feeling of victory was short-lived. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. When he looked down, he saw that a sword had gone through his body. Surprised, he turned around and, to his horror, realized that the person responsible for that treacherous blow was his own student. With a cold and determined look, the student explained his reason. If they returned home in that situation, he would always be seen as just the legendary hero's assistant, living in the protagonist's shadow. But if the protagonist died there, he could take all the glory for himself. The shocked protagonist tried to speak, but his strength was quickly fading. The pain and betrayal weighed heavily on him, and he realized that this was the end of his journey. Yet, in his heart, he still longed for peace, even though he knew he might never see it achieved. So the student, determined in his betrayal, envisioned a future where he would be celebrated as the hero who not only defeated the demon lord, but who also surpassed his own master. The protagonist, still shocked by the betrayal, tried to use a desperate counterattack, but he wasn't fast enough. The student, now with the upper hand, ordered everything to be destroyed: the master, the demon, the entire battlefield, in an act of complete annihilation. A huge explosion took over the place, and chaos spread. In the midst of the confusion, the demons that were still there began to gather, telling each other that the hero's grace had been confirmed. They debated their chances of survival. Without magical powers at that moment, moving forward would be suicide, as they would not be able to resist further attacks from the heroes. Some suggested that perhaps it would be better not to try to resist, but to pray that the demon lord would appear soon. It was, in fact, the only hope for many of them. During the discussion, a demoness spoke about the demon lord, mentioning that she was a rational woman, but also dangerous. The mere thought of facing the demon lord's wrath gave them pain in their stomachs, a kind of physical dread that seemed to paralyze them. "Is this a joke?" muttered one of the demons, trying to ease the tension, but the mood was too dark for humor. At this moment, a demonic elf opened a mystical third eye, which glowed brightly, and began to run desperately. The rest of the group watched her in confusion, asking what was going on. That was when she realized the demon lord was about to act. "We should ask the other squads for help," she shouted, alarmed. Something terrible was happening, and she felt that powerful forces were about to collide. When using her power to analyze the battlefield, the elf detected that the demon's territory was being invaded. An enemy was managing to avoid all the traps and break down the defenses of the demon lord's castle. Knowing that such a huge threat required drastic measures, she used mass resurrection magic. Flesh and bones that had been turned into dust began to regenerate and return to life. The demons that had fallen rose up, ready to reorganize their forces and protect the core of their world. The resurrection magic was successfully activated, and in that instant, immense magical power filled the air. A gigantic energy surged out, revealing an imposing figure. The girl who had performed the spell stared in shock, realizing that the being that stood before her was 20 times more powerful than at its previous peak. But even more surprising, at the center of all this energy was the protagonist. After being betrayed, he had fallen. But now, somehow, he was back. He was on the ground, weakened, but alive. The demon approached, looking at him suspiciously. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to understand how that opponent, who she thought had been defeated, was still standing. The protagonist, breathing hard, looked around, trying to understand what had happened. He knew that the fight was not over yet and that he had somehow been brought back into the battle against all odds. The protagonist, upon waking up in that strange and dark environment, was completely confused. He didn't understand why he was there or what had happened. The last thing he remembered was the intense pain caused by his own student's betrayal, the sword piercing his stomach. Now he was standing, uninjured, and his clothes had changed. Where there had once been a deadly hole, there was now no sign of damage. As he tried to understand his situation, a demon approached him. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and reverence, asking what he intended by appearing like that. It was then that the protagonist noticed something even more disturbing. A mark of the demon lord was engraved on his hand. Upon seeing this mark, the demon, visibly scared, took a few steps back. She began to question whether, somehow, the demon lord's power had been transmitted into the protagonist's body. His wounds were healing quickly, as if a supernatural force was working within his body. The demon, increasingly convinced, began to realize that something had changed profoundly in him. She knelt before him, calling out to the demon lord, declaring that she was there to serve as a faithful lieutenant. With a tone of respect and urgency, she revealed that her name was Estella and asked for forgiveness for not having behaved appropriately after the resurrection, but highlighted that the situation was extremely serious. She begged him to use all his power to save her race. The protagonist, overcome by fear and confusion, looked around, trying to process what was happening. "I'm a hero, not a demon," he exclaimed, trying to reject the reality before his eyes. However, the mark on his hand told a different story. Now, with this demonic mark, he was no longer the hero he used to be. He had been resurrected, but not as a human. Something terrible had happened during the process, and he now saw himself as a demon. Estella, noticing the protagonist's internal conflict, tried to calm him down. "I understand you're confused, especially after you've just been resurrected," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But we don't have time to answer all your questions. We are on the brink of collapse. The hero's attacks are about to destroy the demon lord's castle, and if we don't act quickly, it will be the end of us all." She explained that the demon lord's castle was in grave danger due to a massive invasion by humans. Not just the heroes, but an entire army was advancing, determined to wipe out all the remaining demons. "We're asking a hero to switch sides and fight alongside the demons," she said seriously. "Because now you are no longer a human. You need to use your power to save us all. The situation is much worse than it seems." The protagonist was still trying to process everything. He felt torn between his old self, the hero who fought for justice and humanity, and the new being he had become, marked by demonic power. Despite this, he also realized the urgency of the situation. The demons were desperate, and the humans were advancing quickly. If he didn't do something, a new wave of violence and destruction would consume both sides. Still struggling with his inner doubts, the protagonist moved forward with determination. Even though his mind was filled with uncertainty, he knew he couldn't sit still. Estella, seeing his hesitation, remained beside him. "I will be here to help. Now, we must fight to protect what is left of our world," she stated, as she prepared herself for the impending battle. The protagonist, feeling the weight of fate in his hands, knew that, somehow, he needed to find a solution to this conflict, even if it meant embracing the new power within himself. The protagonist was confused and lost amid the chaotic situation that surrounded him. He was still trying to process everything that had happened from his resurrection to the revelation that he now bore the mark of a demon. Estella, the demonic lieutenant, seemed determined to help him, but the situation was a whirlwind of emotions and uncertainty. Suddenly, Estella approached and, unexpectedly, sat on the protagonist's lap. she commented, with a touch of jest, that she couldn't get his face so close at that moment. He then quickly walked away, apologizing for his impulsive action, but also mentioned that he should get used to demons since he was now part of them, even if that idea still disturbed him. "What's wrong with healing alongside a demon?" she teased, with a slight smile, before blinking her mystical third eye. It was at that moment that Estella realized something. Using her eye power, she detected that a group of humans were attacking demons nearby. "Watch this," she said, as she used her power to show the protagonist what was happening in other locations. The scenes that unfolded before his eyes were terrifying. Humans were advancing without mercy, slaughtering demons with a brutality that seemed inhumane. Upon seeing the carnage, the protagonist was distraught. He realized that, in a sense, the humans were behaving like demons, and the demons, in their defense, seemed more human than ever. "That's the nature of war," Estella commented, with a serious expression. "Fighting, killing, that's what always happens. And it doesn't matter which side." The protagonist, overcome by revolt, screamed in frustration. He knew that he had somehow become a demon, but he could not ignore the brutality he witnessed. He could not allow the killing to continue. Deciding to intervene, he launched himself into the sky, flying towards the battlefield. As he traversed the chaotic battlefield, he wondered what was really going on. Everything that day had been unexpected, and he was still trying to understand if he could somehow make the heroes retreat. Upon arriving at the battlefield, he thought that perhaps he could persuade the heroes to cease the massacre. Who knows, if he told the truth about his betrayal and resurrection, they might listen to him. But before he could make any decision, Estella handed him an item, a mask. She insisted he use it. "Put it on. You are no longer human. If you appear without the mask, you will be seen as the enemy by both sides, and as the hero who killed a demon lord, you will be hunted." Reluctantly, the protagonist donned the mask, becoming an anonymous figure. As he watched the heroes on the battlefield, he heard their voices. They were counting how many demons they had killed, turning the carnage into a competition. One of the warriors, while dancing on the battlefield, boasted about killing a demon, claiming that she was his 25th target. However, the moment he raised his weapon in celebration, something strange happened. His sword was destroyed in flames. The hero looked up and, to his surprise, saw the protagonist descending from the heavens, a dark and powerful figure. The warrior, shaken by the protagonist's imposing presence, hesitated for a moment, but soon regained his confidence. He announced to the group that they had killed the demon lord, and therefore their objective was accomplished. "Why not retreat now?" suggested the protagonist, still trying to convince the heroes to stop. However, his voice was met with disdain. "Do you really think we are going to believe the words of a demon?" replied one of the heroes. "Even if it's true, we won't run away." The tension rose, and the battlefield became a sadistic game. The heroes had set up a competition to see who could kill the most demons, and now they were eager to add the protagonist to their tally. One of them proposed that whoever managed to kill him would earn an extra 5 points. The idea of reducing lives to mere numbers filled the protagonist with even more revulsion, but he knew he couldn't retreat. He had to fight, not just for his survival, but to try to restore some sense of justice to a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. He prepared for battle, aware that he was in a dangerous position. Both humans and demons saw him as a threat, and he would have to fight not only for his own life, but also to find a way to end this endless cycle of violence. Amidst the chaos of battle, the human heroes were blinded by bloodlust, treating war as a sadistic game. They shouted insults and mockery, without any respect for the demons who were desperately fighting for their lives. The protagonist, overcome by growing anger, was unable to accept that cruelty. He knew that, in a war, lives are lost, but turning it into fun was something monstrous. "You are not worthy of being called warriors, much less heroes," he shouted in a powerful voice, which echoed across the battlefield. "You are not even worthy of being called humans." For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. The protagonist's words reached everyone, both heroes and demons. One of the heroes angrily replied, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." And without hesitation, he charged towards the protagonist, brandishing his sacred weapon. The protagonist, powered by enhanced reflexes, jumped over the attack and began to fly. However, he soon realized he was not alone. Two other heroes attacked him simultaneously. The protagonist, now more powerful after his resurrection, noticed that his physical abilities had improved significantly. Even when he was hit by one of the sacred weapons which should have the power to destroy castles, he was not hurt. The strength of his new demonic body protected him in ways he had never imagined. While avoiding the attacks, he remembered something Estella had mentioned. If he was the new demon lord, then he should be able to use magic. Suddenly, a mark flashed on his arm, and a magical grimoire appeared in his hand. With a new understanding of his power, he flipped through the pages of the grimoire and understood that he could cast powerful spells without needing much effort. He didn't need to kill the heroes, just knocking them out would be enough. Without wasting time, the protagonist launched a simple spell, a fireball. However, to his surprise, the seemingly harmless spell caused a devastating explosion. The battlefield was filled with flames and energy. The heroes were thrown away, teleported back to the human realm, and their sacred weapons were destroyed in the process. Confused and surprised by the magnitude of his new power, the protagonist wondered if he had really killed those heroes. However, Estella reassured him, explaining that they had merely been driven from the battlefield. She also mentioned that his power was that of a new demon lord, and that as such, his magical potential surpassed the expectations of even the most powerful demons. The news quickly spread across the battlefield. Everyone realized that a new demon lord had been born. The demons, once desperate and on the verge of defeat, began to shout with joy. They surrounded the protagonist, thanking him for saving their lives and stopping the hero's advance. A woman, visibly moved, held the protagonist's hand and thanked him deeply. His heart quickened at the touch and the genuine gratitude in her eyes. More and more demons approached, expressing their admiration and gratitude. For the first time in a long time, the protagonist felt something other than confusion and fear. He felt the warmth of acceptance and the strength of being admired. Even though he was still torn internally, a part of him couldn't help but appreciate the feeling of being needed, of being seen as a savior, even if by those he, until recently, considered enemies. For a moment, he tried to call for help, overwhelmed by the attention, but the feeling of being admired, of being the center of gratitude for so many lives saved, was comforting in an unexpected way. He knew the war was far from over, but in that moment, surrounded by grateful faces, he felt like he had somehow found a new purpose. The protagonist, now enveloped in a mix of confusion and acceptance, realized that there was not much he could do about his new condition. He looked around, observing the demons that now surrounded him with gratitude. Even though he felt out of place, he began to wonder if there wasn't a certain peace in being accepted, even in a new role he never imagined for himself. As the demons lifted him up in celebration, he questioned what everyone was doing. Lieutenant Estella, who was smiling, continued watching the scene with satisfaction, but was soon reminded by one of the protagonist's subordinates that he still had a hole in his stomach, a wound that, somehow, still needed treatment. Estella then began to cast more healing magic, while the protagonist's assistants approached to thank her for her heroic work that day. They led him to an improvised room inside the castle, a simple but cozy place, even with a tea set placed on a table. Sitting there, the protagonist observed the environment. As much as the appearance of the demons' buildings and clothing was different, he began to notice the similarities between their culture and that of humans. Many demons, contrary to what he thought, were civilians, busy with simple jobs such as agriculture and livestock, living their lives peacefully. For humans, demons were seen as barbarians, but the reality was very different. By observing these beings, the protagonist began to understand that, from the demon's point of view, humans were the true invaders. Meanwhile, he felt his body recovering faster than he had imagined. The old wounds were gone, and he felt better than ever. However, something worried him. He wondered what caused his resurrection in such an unusual way. Estella tried to explain what could have happened. The rebirth magic used was intended for the demon lord, and somehow, instead of restoring the original demon, it transferred the power to the protagonist. Perhaps the interference from the sacred weapon he possessed caused confusion in the magic, leading to his resurrection not as a human, but as a demon. She suggested that this anomaly could be compared to a virus that altered the original spell. The result was a miraculous rebirth, which transformed the protagonist into something far beyond his human form. He reflected on this, realizing that even with all the signs of perfect health, the unique pressure he used to feel from demons was now present within himself. It was as if he had truly become one of them. Seeing the smiling faces around him, a sense of relief washed over him. Perhaps he had truly become part of this new race, although he still carried doubts about what this meant for his future. Being the new demon lord meant making humans his enemies. This bothered him deeply because, as someone who was once a hero, he had always believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence between races. Thinking about this, he wondered, why did the ancient demon lord invade the human world in the first place? Was it impossible for both sides to achieve peace? After all, if they both wanted peace, why were they trapped in an endless cycle of war and destruction? This doubt began to weigh on him, but it also drove him. Perhaps, as the new demon lord, he could find a different path, a path that avoided direct confrontation between the two races. Perhaps, with the power he now possessed, he could change the fates of demons and humans alike, and finally bring the peace he so desired, both to those who now saw him as a savior, and to the humans who still lived in fear of demons. Then all the bloodshed that occurred could have been avoided. At that moment, a new person appeared and started talking. She mentioned that the former demon lord once declared that her purpose was to protect hell. The protagonist, intrigued, questioned whether the intention was really to protect hell without the need to kill humans. He asked if this was true, but in the middle of this conversation, the scenario changed to the next day. The protagonist ended up waking up and realized that he must have fallen asleep without realizing it. Confused, he wondered if it really was daytime, since the environment didn't have a visible sun, which left him unaware of what time it was. He thought it might be a good idea to explore the area outside the castle. However, he remembered something important. If someone found out that he was originally a human, he might end up being seen as an enemy. With this memory, he decided that he must wear the mask when walking around to ensure his hidden identity. While he was lost in his thoughts and trying to get his bearings, a voice called out to him. "Your Majesty, good morning," said an elf. He quickly recognized her as the girl from the day before, which made her visibly happy to have been remembered. She then formally introduced herself as Sodom Balgamug, the captain of the castle guard. Soon after, another person appeared, also greeting the protagonist with a good morning. This person asked if he would like to join them when they went to visit the graves. Curious, the protagonist asked what these tombs were. They explained that they were the graves of their fallen comrades and the former demon lord. They mentioned that although they wished to make a proper grave at a future date, for now they had built a temporary tomb as best they could. The protagonist, being someone on the invading side, began to wonder if it would be appropriate for him to pray for the victims. Still, he decided to do it. After this moment of reflection, the group suggested that everyone return to work. However, the protagonist, observing that many had not yet fully recovered from their injuries, questioned what the problem would be in taking time to rest. He remembered that the day before, they managed to expel the human forces, so why not take advantage of this break to recover? This suggestion left everyone surprised, but at the same time, very happy. They commented that the protagonist was actually incredibly kind and began to admire the compassion he showed even towards soldiers. To them, he was a generous ruler, just as one would expect from a great demon. The protagonist, in turn, reflected on whether it was just normal to want to rest when injured. He began to wonder how the former demon lord treated his subordinates and whether his own common sense was out of place in this world so different from the one he knew. So, the protagonist decided to ask one of the subordinates about the difficult conditions she faced. He questioned why everyone continued to do their duties, even after such a tough battle and lack of rest. The subordinate explained that her family had always worked for the Devil's Home, and that this message was passed down from generation to generation. The mission was to protect the castle and save Hell. Protecting Hell, according to her, meant protecting all demons from evil, and that gave her a lot of pride. The protagonist was perplexed by this explanation. She went on to say that because of this, she still kept these words close to her heart and worked hard every day. Her companions in Hell were very precious to her. However, as they talked, another person approached and mentioned that he had taken a pay cut 3 months ago and never thought about looking for another job. At that time, everyone was in a difficult situation, so they kept laughing and trying to overcome difficulties. The protagonist, however, didn't want to take the conversation in that direction, but he felt enormous pressure and ran to gather everyone, asking them to get down. Suddenly, a blow comes from the sky, and he wonders what it is that comes from so far away. It is the spirit of the ancient demon lord. He asks everyone to calm down and to please forgive his anger, which was provoked because he felt disrespected. The protagonist has seen this type of attack before and moves forward to face it. He manages to dodge the blow, grabs someone's sword, and cuts the spirit in half. After the attack, the protagonist realizes that he was able to take down something so large with ease and understands that it was a kind of automated sacred armor. These sacred weapons are usually given by the gods to humans to fight against demons and other magical beasts. Whoever can use these weapons is called a hero. This means heroes must be nearby. The orders for these pieces of equipment remain the same even without the owner, and the protagonist thinks it was more of a parting gift than a direct attack. It seems the spirit's order was to seek and destroy demons, and since he is able to sniff out demon lord surrogates, perhaps he can use a little magic to resolve the situation. He decides to take his grimoire and tries to use a spell. He uses Origin X-ray and several balls of energy begin to grow in the sky and spread. This spell should take care of any other automated sacred armor. He instructs that if anyone is hurt or there is a new topic, they should inform him immediately as he is there to meet with Estella the Majesty. She is surprised and praises him, saying that it is as expected from a great demon lord. He apologizes and wonders where he should go since he doesn't know the castle well. She decides to guide him for a while and thanks him, as it will save him a lot of trouble. She tells him that everything is fine and that he can help himself since he might be hungry. Then he took a rice ball and ate it calmly. Another person, who was nearby, observed the gesture and, thinking that the commander, considered by many to be a demonic leader, might not have access to high-quality food, decided to share some extra provisions with him. The attitude seemed a little rude, but she was right to act like that, as she felt guilty that he didn't have something better to eat. However, the protagonist was not worried about this. He continued eating, savoring the cupcake, and expressed his gratitude, saying it was delicious. He sincerely thanked her for the food, assuring her that he would do his best to repay the kindness appropriately in the near future. She asked him not to worry about it, stating that it was not necessary to reciprocate, and insisted that he not tell others about what happened. Afterward, she took a stand, saying that they would do everything in their power to help him, showing eagerness to work alongside him. The protagonist was happy to hear such words and replied that he would count on everyone at that moment. Inside the castle, he met another person and politely said good morning. That person, who was outside, observed the scene and was impressed. She saw everything clearly, even though she wasn't in the room before. Despite the things she said the night before, she was now very happy and determined to help everyone of her own free will. He recognized that although he hadn't thought much about it when he was still human, he now realized that Hell had its own culture and community. demons sympathize with their companions and demonstrate a sense of justice and compassion. Knowing all this, he realized that he could no longer fight alongside the hero, as he could not allow such kind people to die. After all, even among humans, there are many who seek peace in their own way. She tried to explain this point of view by reflecting on the destruction humans caused in just one day. The protagonist was at the top of one of the castle's towers, observing the devastation caused by humans during the invasion. He turned to the castle's outer barrier, destroyed by the heroes, and declared that they needed to fix everything. There was still a lot of work ahead, and it would be great if they had some experts in restoration magic. However, he pondered whether restoration magic was part of the demon's culture, or whether it was an exclusively human practice. At least, he knew that these were not the demon lord's responsibilities. Curious, the protagonist took out his grimoire and began reading about the repair rune. He discovered that any object composed of magical powers and abilities could be repaired with this spell. Likewise, objects made from natural components could also be restored. Compared to holy weapons, which are mainly focused on destruction, magic seemed to be much more diverse in its uses. He reflected on the potential of this magic and how he could use it to restore the castle and protect its people. Then, the protagonist cast the repair spell, and things began to magically fall into place. The castle walls, which had been damaged, began to repair themselves, the stones falling back into place as if drawn by an invisible force. In a few seconds, everything was as before, or even better. The people around were impressed with his skill and commented among themselves how incredible it was to fix everything in such a short time. The protagonist, however, looked at one of them and asked, in a serious tone, not to start making exaggerated comparisons, mentioning the expression "Sasamao." The person, confused, asked what that meant, and he just asked him not to worry about it, as he knew that everyone expected a lot from the new demon lord. Time moves forward a little, and we are transported back to the moment when the protagonist was still a hero. Back then, he had managed to open 5 holes in the outer barrier of the demon lord's castle. Taking advantage of these gaps, the heroes divided into 5 platoons, each with the mission of storming the castle through these openings. The group was outnumbered, with the exception of Tile, who led one of the platoons. However, despite the effort, all of the heroes were eliminated except for Tile. The protagonist, who was watching the scene, asked worriedly what that was, and he again asked her not to worry. Tile's objective was clear. He was determined to kill the protagonist, believing that by doing so, he would achieve his goals. He also knew very well what had happened to the other 4 companions who were by his side. Most of the heroes retreated after the initial attack, but some decided to remain camped near the openings they created in the outer barrier, waiting for another opportunity to attack. While repairing the barrier, the protagonist reflected that they would need to go east and deal with these heroes who still remained nearby. The openings in the barrier could not be left unprotected. He knew it was time to act again and wondered if he should go to the battlefield himself. However, he also pondered whether it was worth risking the soldiers' lives without a solid reason. When discussing the situation, one person suggested that he fight together with the soldiers and recklessly mentioned that he could use others as shields. The protagonist, irritated, firmly interrupted her. He declared that although he didn't know how the previous demon lord acted, he would never use anyone as a shield. He made it clear that, regardless of the situation, he would not allow lives to be wasted irresponsibly. For him, staying alive was the #1 priority, and he wasn't willing to sacrifice that for a reckless plan. He also emphasized that he did not intend to use this type of strategy frequently and that his order was clear. Everyone's safety came first. She understood the gravity of the situation and, even though she was a little sad about not being able to help in the way she wanted, she accepted the protagonist's words. The protagonist decided that he needed a specific skill to defeat his enemies efficiently. Without this ability, he would feel completely lost in battle. He expressed this need, and his companion, upon hearing this, smiled happily. Feeling her confidence, the protagonist asked if he could count on her help to face the next challenge. She responded with an enthusiastic yes, ready to join him. In the middle of the conversation, other people started to appear in the castle. They were other heroes who had arrived, commenting among themselves on the fact that he was now the new demon lord. One of them mentioned that the protagonist had already defeated 3 of the Alex brothers before, but warned that he shouldn't underestimate the greatest duo of heroes he was about to face. However, the protagonist, without hesitation, attacked the heroes with overwhelming force and defeated them in a single blow. After victory, he used the repair rune again, his hands energized by the magic as he restored the damaged areas of the castle. He repeated the spell several times, becoming more and more efficient, until the entire left part of the castle was completely repaired. The difference in power between him and his opponents made the battle easier than expected, but it also highlighted how powerful he had become. After finishing the work, he thanked everyone for their effort and commented that he didn't seem to need that much help, suggesting that they drink some water to rehydrate. Thanks to him, the local troops, who were dispersed, began to return to the castle. Many soldiers were excited to have the chance to see the protagonist in action. They watched his every move like privileged spectators, almost as if they were sitting in the front row of an impressive spectacle. However, he knew it was time for everyone to prepare for the next challenge. While organizing themselves for their next destination, the protagonist was informed that a dragon was ahead, waiting for him. Flying on a dragon was something he had always wanted to try, but no one had ever mentioned that comfort wasn't exactly a priority during such flights. The region's strong wind and harsh climate made the journey even more challenging. Before they left, the girl who accompanied him suggested that he hold on to something to keep himself safe during the flight. Without thinking twice, the protagonist grabbed her waist, feeling the heat of her body against his as the dragon began to take flight. As they gained altitude, he noticed that she was completely red and asked if she was okay. She replied, embarrassed, that she was feeling terribly nervous, confessing that being so close to a man's face made her anxious. The fact that he was gently holding her from behind only added to her nervousness. She began to apologize, explaining that she was only acting like this out of respect for His Majesty. The protagonist understood what she was trying to say, but said she didn't need to be so formal with him all the time. He considered her a life partner, someone he trusted deeply. With a smile, he tried to calm her, saying that, above all, they were on this journey together and that she didn't need to worry about being perfect all the time. After the flight with the dragon, the protagonist noticed that his companion was extremely tense. He advised her to relax a little, saying she didn't deserve to feel so pressured. In fact, his goal was the opposite of making everything more difficult. He suggested that, to ease the tension, she could start calling his name, Fried, just like he introduced himself when they first met. He wanted her to feel at ease and closer to him. She was surprised by the suggestion and, not knowing exactly how to react, hesitated. How could she call him by his first name? It was a breach of formality that seemed unthinkable to her. He tried to reassure her, suggesting that she could only call him that when they were alone. But he made it clear that he didn't want to force anything, and that the most important thing was that she felt comfortable. Even so, she tried, somewhat shy and confused, to call the protagonist by name. When she finally did, he stood blankly for a moment, surprised and perhaps a little emotional. She, on the other hand, was completely disconcerted, as if she were crossing a barrier she never imagined she would cross. It was a situation that resembled what a couple of partners could experience, an intimate and meaningful moment. Apologizing, she confessed that she would need some time to get used to this new dynamic. The protagonist, noticing her stubbornness, smiled fondly, realizing that, despite everything, she was trying hard to adapt. Meanwhile, on the other side, they saw some people in the distance. It seemed that the protagonist recognized one of the approaching figures. The companion, curious, asked if he knew that hero who had appeared. The protagonist replied that, personally, he had never met him before, but he knew very well who he was. The man approaching was none other than Claudius, a renowned and feared hero among demons for his specialty in hunting and eliminating them without mercy. When Claudio finally approached, he stopped in front of the protagonist, clearly disappointed. He commented that the protagonist looked completely different from what had been described to him. That was the perfect time to attack, as he noticed a momentary weakness in the protagonist, a hesitation that he could exploit. Claudio, even though he knew that the protagonist was now his enemy, did not hesitate to advance with his sword in hand, determined to carry out his mission. The two crossed swords, and the impact of the battle was palpable. Claudio, although he respected the warrior's code, did not hold back. He wanted to teach the protagonist a lesson, showing that underestimating an opponent could make things even more difficult. In the midst of combat, he spoke about the importance of giving an opponent a worthy end, even if it was a demon. For him, it was a matter of honor. However, the protagonist was not willing to surrender to such ideals. He knew that Claudio was just trying to manipulate the situation and wouldn't give in so easily. Even though Claudius presented himself as an honorable warrior, the protagonist realized that, deep down, he was also driven by his own pride and desire for victory. Suddenly, the confrontation intensified as more skeletons, creatures resurrected by magic, appeared around them. Claudius, with his formidable skill, defeated all the skeletons without showing any sign of mercy. He believed that such creatures deserved no respect, treating them only as obstacles in his path. For him, there was no reason to show compassion for worms like those. Claudio, determined and full of conviction, advanced towards the protagonist, declaring that they would fight there and now. The tension in the air was palpable as he prepared to deliver his first blow. The protagonist, aware of the gravity of the situation, took a deep breath, concentrating. He raised his sword, but to his surprise and shock, the blade broke under the force of Claudius' first attack. The hero smiled superiorly, noticing the surprise on the protagonist's face. Without wasting time, Claudio advanced again, with the intention of finishing the fight quickly. The protagonist, however, reacted quickly, skillfully dodging the blow. Claudius, without losing his composure, explained in a cold and confident voice that his sacred weapon had the power to pierce through anything, regardless of who the target was. He stated that whether the protagonist was the demon lord or any other powerful entity, nothing could escape his fate when facing Claudius' blade. He was convinced that death was all that awaited his enemy. As the battle unfolded, the protagonist realized that Claudio's weapon, in addition to being lethal at short and long range, had a notable weakness: lack of defense. The blade was like a sharp edge that cut through the air, but there was nothing protecting Claudio from a counterattack. Even so, Claudio was so confident in his ability that he seemed to believe he would not need to defend himself. He saw himself as one of the 5 most powerful heroes, an expert at crushing demons, and was now determined to add the demon lord's decisive defeat to his achievements. Claudio advanced again, delivering quick and precise blows. He wanted to know how long the protagonist intended to continue avoiding the blade, thinking that his victory was inevitable. But the protagonist, with calm and concentration, continued to dodge all the attacks, moving with surprising lightness and agility. "You don't need to keep dodging my attacks forever," Claudio exclaimed, his tone thick with impatience and frustration. He was beginning to realize that, despite his initial confidence, the protagonist was not an easy opponent. The protagonist's every movement was calculated, and he dodged with surgical precision, without showing signs of fatigue or fear. The protagonist, on the other hand, understood that it was not just a matter of avoiding Claudio's blade, but of finding the right moment to turn the game in his favor. He wasn't just reacting to the attacks. He was studying Claudio, analyzing every movement, every weak point. He knew that his victory would depend not on brute force, but on strategy and patience. When the protagonist realized that continuing to just dodge would not lead to victory, he decided to act. With a swift movement, he cast powerful magic. From his back, several magical spears emerged, shining with menacing energy, which immediately rushed toward Claudio. The hero, surprised by the speed and intensity of the attack, tried to react, but his sacred sword, the weapon he trusted so much, ended up breaking under the impact of the spears. Claudio, completely stunned, shouted in disbelief, "This can't be happening." He was clearly shaken by the fact that his holy sword, which he believed to be invincible, had been destroyed. Angrily, he accused the protagonist of being a coward for using magic, saying that if he were a real man, he should fight empty-handed, without resorting to magical tricks. The protagonist, in turn, remained calm. He realized that Claudio was now completely disarmed and disoriented. Claudio, however, did not surrender easily. Extremely angry, he charged forward, shouting that no one could match him, much less make him surrender. But the protagonist, with impressive strength, simply held Claudio with one hand, stopping his advance. "You said no one could match you," the protagonist spoke in a firm voice, "but it seems like you're giving in now." Claudio, desperate, struggled to free himself, but the protagonist, with a quick and precise movement, turned him upside down and threw him to the ground with force. The impact was so strong that the ground shook, and Claudio was momentarily stunned, completely confused by what had just happened. Feeling that he was lost, the hero, in a last act of desperation, asked for help, screaming for someone to save him. However, the protagonist was already one step ahead. With skill, he quickly tied up Claudio, preventing any attempt to escape. Claudio, realizing that he was truly defeated, begged the demon lord for his life. Surprisingly, the protagonist decided to spare him, seeing the chance to show mercy even in the face of his enemy. Claudio, however, did not accept this humiliation easily. Enraged, he shouted that the protagonist should not feel victorious, warning that there were still 4 powerful heroes remaining, all with equally fearsome swords and difficult to face. Before leaving, Claudio launched one last threat. He stated that, in 3 months, a new invasion would be carried out, and that the protagonist should run in fear and wait for it. He swore that the hero guild would give no quarter, no matter who opposed them. Claudio made it clear that, regardless of the protagonist's power, he was nothing compared to the strength of the heroes and the gods themselves. The protagonist, however, was not shaken by Claudio's words. He watched calmly as the hero fled, clearly frightened but still arrogant in his belief that the heroes would win. After Claudio disappeared, the protagonist felt he needed a moment of reflection. He went to the tombs of the fallen, a place of peace amidst the chaos, and placed a flower on one of the tombs as a gesture of respect. "Leave the rest to me," he murmured softly, looking at the tomb. "You can rest in peace now." While he was there, his assistant approached, informing him that she had confirmed all the damage done to the castle, but that the outer barrier had been successfully repaired. She suggested that this would be a good place to rest and regain strength. However, she also warned that a new invasion was being prepared and that the next opponents would be even stronger among the remaining heroes. In the midst of this whirlwind of events, the protagonist's assistant enthusiastically expressed that it was a triumphant victory. The demon lord had returned. But why was she so overjoyed about it? After all, when the demon lord returns, they usually celebrate in a grand and spectacular way, something that is truly beautiful to see. All the troops would likely return home, which meant they could now be discharged and no longer have to put so much pressure on themselves. Reflecting on this, he mentioned that everyone could return to their homes. So why was it so noisy near the gate? Was something happening? That could mean something else. In the midst of this confusion, the protagonist is warmly welcomed by a person who embraces him. At this moment, he felt more relaxed, enveloped in a welcoming atmosphere, which made him think that everything was fine. However, as it was official to show respect on occasions like the demon lord's return, he pondered how he should proceed. After all, he was there to do the job well. At that moment, she was really worried, like the rest of the team, about how the protagonist would be welcomed. Everyone was looking forward to his arrival, and he was touched by it. When they asked about the human invasion, he replied that everything was under control. The people then welcomed the protagonist, praising him for the good work. The celebration, although it made him a little embarrassed, was a show of recognition. The protagonist's assistant commented that she understood that the celebration in honor of the Majesty was wonderful, but it was necessary to show a little restraint at that moment. After all, he was the Lord of all. The protagonist, reflecting on his dignity as a lord, stated that respect was crucial to maintaining high morale, something very important. He needed to make everyone understand that it was not necessary to force a change of climate every time. She understood the protagonist's point, but considering that the Majesty had approved the celebration, perhaps it would be appropriate to relax a little and enjoy the moment. So, the protagonist made the decision to restrict all statuses and apologize to the staff. Even though he was a superior figure, he recognized that if even she, who is so respected, truly loves what she does and keeps an open mind, then everything was in order. However, he stressed that there was no need to worry so much about her, as that place was full of good and trustworthy people. In the midst of all this tension, the protagonist began to feel a hostile aura coming from somewhere. He looked around, searching for the source of this unsettling feeling, and soon realized that he was right. That feeling was, in fact, hostility. They then received information that the Romans were preparing for yet another invasion, which required everyone to be properly prepared in case an emergency actually arose. At that moment, the protagonist began to question what exactly was happening. In the midst of this, it was decided that they needed to ensure that the defenders were properly prepared to face the next invasion. The status of their military strength was a cause for concern. The general idea was that they had the support of humans on their side, but they urgently needed 7 more generals to make up the Demon King's army, each commanding their own squad. All subordinates were part of the nation's administration, and therefore the troops were extremely valuable and essential. However, due to the previous battle, 3 of the squads had been completely annihilated, and the leaders of these groups were killed during the fighting. Now, there were only 4 generals left, including Gigantroa and the Path of the Dead, both of whom were in dire need of reinforcements due to the human invasion. After the previous battle, everyone fought with admirable courage, but Death's power was still unknown and mysterious. Despite this, Death's protagonism was not necessarily a bad thing. The question was whether they would be able to find all the team members, as some, like the infarcted eye, had special abilities that allowed them to take refuge in a space outside our world. It was believed that this refuge was necessary for them to recover. In other words, the only general who was active on the protagonist's side was his assistant, and the number of capable fighters was dangerously low, considering the critical situation they found themselves in. Even if they managed to resist the next attack, the protagonist knew that he would have to keep moving around the castle, which seemed practically impossible due to the size of the area to be defended. He was worried about the limits of the troops' power, as the enemy attacked from all directions, just like last time. Even the Demon Lord, who planned to avoid deaths, encountered immense difficulties. Thus, spreading the defense with all available capacity and mobilizing all members was the only viable option. The remaining troops needed to be regrouped and reinforced. The other 2 units that were still missing were to be ordered to position themselves quickly. This could turn the situation into a real hell, but it was necessary for everyone to return before it was too late, to decide the next place where they would establish their defense. At the end of it all, they would have to train the troops they currently have. She looks at the protagonist and smiles, saying with a touch of irony, "In this kind of thing, what does the Demon Lord really think work is?" At that moment, Nice hears a noise around him and asks, with a confused expression, what that was. It was an official request, as if it were yet another request to obtain information about locations and other missions that would be officially assigned. They even have documents and scriptures from hell, which seemed unlikely. He wonders if he would be able to read this kind of thing, as some of the words are incomprehensible to him. Understanding the politics of hell and the complex economics of dark world activities could be an arduous task, especially when one lacks prior experience. In this case, she offers to help, saying that she could help him with any questions that arose in the documents, and by doing so, he would probably learn the words gradually. She guarantees that she would be by his side to help him whenever necessary. The protagonist, touched by the offer, holds her hand and declares that he would count on her help, as he decided that he would carry the full weight of his responsibilities as Demon Lord. He could not disappoint those who depended on him, just through lack of knowledge. She is slightly surprised, but understands the seriousness of his words and, although she knew it could be difficult, promises to provide all the necessary support. So, they prepare for a fight. The protagonist finds himself facing a monster that pushes him hard, but he manages to defend himself. So, this is the kind of opponent that might be dexterous enough to throw us off the battlefield, he thinks. Could it be that these enemies have become stronger now since they can't rely on magic as much? She observes the situation and comments that they are evacuating all the vices present. "Good work, all of you. Now we can move forward," she declares. The determined protagonist throws an automatic weapon out, but the monster reacts quickly, shooting a laser in his direction. At that moment, he firmly says that the only one who would disappear would be himself, cutting the laser with his sword in one precise movement. "You would disappear now," he murmurs, as he delivers the final blow. After some time, the monster is finally defeated, and it appears that he can now use this experience during future defenses, without simply destroying the cities or castle in the process. She thanks the protagonist for his help, and with that in mind, it was time to face some officers. Would he be ready for this next task? Despite all her help, he knew there were many things that still needed to be done. So, it wouldn't be a bad idea for her to take some time off to rest since the Majesty had been working non-stop for the past few days. It would be an excellent opportunity to take care of herself and relax. If that were the case, they would already have a plan in mind for this. And what better way to rest than attending an elegant party? A feast carefully prepared for everyone. While the protagonist wonders if that could really be considered rest, he realizes that, even though he was at a party, the formality of the occasion was something that made him tense. Seeing the people around him relaxing and drinking seemed like a contrast to what he was feeling. The banquet had a vibrant atmosphere, and everyone seemed to be enjoying the moment. The protagonist wonders if he himself was having fun as he should. His assistant approaches, asking if he is enjoying the party. He is completely embarrassed to see her dressed in an elegant outfit that enhances her beauty even more. She notices his reaction and, with a gentle smile, asks if there is something that is bothering him. The protagonist, trying to hide his embarrassment, replies that it's nothing, just that the dress fits her very well. She thanks him with a soft smile, feeling honored to receive a compliment from the Majesty. At that moment, other elves approached, asking if he would like a drink. Even before he could respond, it was clear that some of them were already slightly intoxicated. The protagonist tries to maintain his composure while noticing the carefree joy around him. The ordinary troops, who normally maintain discipline, were now enjoying delicious food and the light atmosphere. He remembers how he invited everyone to the banquet as a thank you for their unwavering support during the difficult times. Amidst the celebration, one of the elves warmly thanks the protagonist for the food and the gesture of gratitude, and although she was a little drunk, her thanks were sincere. The assistant, noticing the behavior of the other elves, comments, a little disconcerted, that this did not seem to be the behavior she expected to see at an event with the Majesty present. She recalls the books she read as a child, which talked about keeping a respectful distance when serving the Demon Lord, and that festivities should be conducted with dignity. The girls, however, don't seem to mind this too much, celebrating the rest of the party with enthusiasm. When the protagonist's assistant walks away to get a drink, he observes the elves around him and comments to himself that they seem to be enjoying the party as they see fit. Suddenly, he feels a look of hostility directed at him. This makes him alert, and he decides to investigate. Looking around, he notices that some demons were watching him with expressions that mixed distrust and malice. The festive atmosphere suddenly seemed to become a little more tense for the protagonist. who, even in a moment of relaxation, felt the weight of his position and the potential threats around him. So, he decides to use one of his abilities that sharpen his senses, allowing him to hear the conversation of the demons that were watching him. They talked about the new demon lord, commenting dismissively that he was becoming so confident that he even organized a party. He's so full of himself, just because some civilians started supporting him. But it's not about that. We can't talk like that, one of them whispers, trying to moderate the conversation. Another demon responds, "It seems like he really is politically moderate, but deep down, he's just another weak person. And he really thinks this peace is something that should be maintained. That doesn't make sense. The real demon lord should be someone chosen for strength and courage in battle, not popularity or partying." They laughed sarcastically, while another demon commented, "Don't worry, if he keeps this up, someone else will be chosen quickly. There's only a little time left before everything changes." The protagonist, listening to all this, realizes that there is growing dissatisfaction among some of his subjects. He knows that some people don't approve of his way of governing, and this makes him worried. Perhaps he needed to come up with a plan to deal with these issues and secure his position. He thinks about discussing the matter with his assistant, but when he looks at her, he realizes that she is too drunk for any serious conversation. He approaches and, worried, asks if she is okay. She, a little dizzy, tries to stay upright, but ends up tripping, revealing that she drank a little more than she should have. At that moment, the protagonist, taking responsibility, decides that the best thing would be to take her back to her room so she can rest. Carrying her in his arms, he crosses the party and heads to the bedroom. She, still half-conscious, apologizes for causing trouble. The protagonist, with a gentle smile, asks her not to worry about it, saying that she deserved a rest for all the hard work she has done. She, with a soft and slightly drunk voice, murmurs that working for the Majesty is something natural when you have bravery. She mentions that although many people help the protagonist, he rarely cares about himself. At that moment, with her words a little confused by the drink, she says that the protagonist's concerns are evident, and that, as much as he fights bravely for his allies, it's difficult to know how many people would do the same for him. This reflection leaves her thoughtful, and she comments that, despite all the support the protagonist receives, it often seems like he carries a lonely burden. She asks him, almost rhetorically, how many people in the world would actually make the same decisions as him. In the midst of this conversation, she mentions something that makes him stop to reflect. The protagonist had realized, throughout his battles, that some humans betrayed him. With these words echoing in his mind, the protagonist puts his assistant to rest in the room, but is unable to shake off the restlessness that the conversations at the party and his assistant's words have brought to the surface. He knew he would need to face these challenges, both external and internal, to consolidate his position and protect those dear to him. Being on the same side as the demons, the protagonist begins to deeply understand the complexity of what is at stake. He realizes that the enemy who killed the former demon lord was more than just an eliminated threat. It was a challenge to the very balance of the demon kingdom. Now, the responsibility of carrying on the legacy of the former lord falls upon him, and this responsibility is not something that can be taken lightly. One of his closest allies, a member of a clan loyal to the demon lord, decides to pledge her complete loyalty to the protagonist. She vows to always stand by his side, providing support whenever needed, and assures him that her clan will also remain united with him on this journey. She stresses that the Sea of Demons should not be governed arbitrarily, but should instead be led with strong and fair leadership. Her commitment is so deep that she declares she is willing to give even more than she already does if necessary. In the middle of this conversation, the protagonist realizes that something is wrong. His ally appears to be sick, and before he can ask what's going on, she runs towards the bathroom, leaving him worried. Startled, he asks if she's okay, if she really needs to relieve herself, and follows her into the bathroom to make sure she's taking care of herself. The next morning, the protagonist is in his office, reviewing documents and planning his next steps, when his ally enters, visibly embarrassed by what happened the night before. She apologizes for any trouble she may have caused and thanks him for his concern. The protagonist, showing empathy, asks if she is feeling better, to which she responds that she is fine and ready to continue with her responsibilities. As part of these responsibilities, she gives the protagonist a list of potential traitors, fulfilling a request he had made previously. She explains that these individuals are all subordinates of other lords, specifically beastmen, and are part of a faction that appears to be planning an invasion of the human world. In the past, one of the individuals on the list had applied to become the next demon lord. Traditionally, the new lord is chosen by the current one, and this candidate had great ambitions to assume the throne. However, in the end, it was someone else who ended up being chosen, which left him obsessed with the power and throne he believed was rightfully his. This obsession led him to make several attempts at manipulation, using his subordinates to try to take the throne by force. Despite all his efforts, he was never successful, and these actions led to him being placed under suspicion for a time. She mentions that during the last defense against the humans, none of the troops under this individual's command participated in the battle, which raised even more suspicions about his loyalty. The situation is complicated, and the protagonist realizes that he needs to act cautiously. As he reviews the information his ally brought him, he knows that the next decisions he will make will be crucial to ensuring the stability of his reign and the protection of all those loyal to him. Faced with the urgent situation, the protagonist realizes that the threat of traitors could cause serious problems for everyone. This situation is not very different from the challenges he faced when he was still human, where vigilance and anticipation of suspicious movements were crucial. Determined to act quickly, he instructs his allies to monitor suspects, using an ability known as the Third Eye, which allows them to detect suspicious behavior and activities more efficiently. If something strange was detected, the protagonist would be immediately alerted, allowing him to take quick and decisive action. With the situation becoming increasingly critical, he orders his subordinates to exercise extreme caution when dealing with the area where the traitors are located. They need to move quickly and accurately, as any mistake can result in disastrous consequences. As they advance, the protagonist and his group begin to invade the place where the traitors are hiding. Using his skills, the protagonist concentrates and can accurately identify the location of enemies. He realizes that the traitors are still inside, apparently oblivious to the fact that they have been discovered. This discovery gives the protagonist the advantage of planning a surprise attack. Knowing where they are, he can coordinate his allies to surround and neutralize the traitors efficiently, minimizing the risks to his own group. He understands that he cannot leave room for error, as the impact of betrayal could be devastating to the balance of power he is trying to maintain. The tension in the air is palpable as the protagonist prepares for the next stage of the operation. He knows that, at this moment, every decision and every move is crucial to the success of the mission and the safety of everyone under his command. Then, the protagonist, sensing the dark energy and evil intentions of the traitors, takes the initiative to confront them directly. He knew that the remnants of the magic used by the traitors had enormous power, and their plan to use it to proclaim a new king was evident. The magic accumulated at that moment was about to cause a devastating explosion, and the traitors' plan was clear: kill the current majesty. They believed that, by eliminating the demon lord, they could take the throne for themselves, but they did not imagine that the protagonist was so aware of their schemes. The leader of the traitors, an ambitious figure, hesitates for a moment. She understands that although the plan seems solid, challenging the majesty to a direct fight for the title of Demon Lord would be a much more honorable way to prove the Beastman's bravery. Assassinating the Demon Lord, even if it were possible, felt like a betrayal of her own principles. However, her ally, furious with her change of opinion, accuses her of weakness, increasing the tension in the environment. At that moment, the protagonist, who had used his abilities to listen to all their plans, makes his dramatic entrance. The magical explosion that was supposed to occur is interrupted by the demon lord's powerful presence. The protagonist's assistants appear at his side, ready to act. The protagonist, with cold calm, says he has some questions for the traitors. He gives them one last chance. If they give up right then, he will guarantee everyone's safety. Otherwise, he will not hesitate to use his full strength. The traitors, however, are already cornered. They know that surrendering now would be an admission of weakness and betrayal, something they cannot allow. They, therefore, decide to fight until the end. Just when the tension reaches its peak, a strange sound echoes through the place. Dark specters appear, proclaiming that those who disobey the devil's side will face death. One of the traitors, unable to resist the presence of the specters, has his vital energy drained, falling into a state of near death. Another specter, following the protagonist's orders, spares the rest but warns that the situation is not favorable for them. In the ensuing chaos, one of the traitors tries to pull his leader into combat, but she is brutally stabbed in the back by a mysterious warrior. The protagonist, alarmed, holds the girl while the atmosphere of tension increases among those present. It is at that moment that the true enemy reveals himself, one of the most powerful generals of the demonic army, one of the 7 generals, known as the Undead. He introduces himself, explaining that he returned after taking over an entire continent. His job, according to him, was to eliminate any traitor who rebelled against the demon lord. However, the protagonist, maintaining his authority, questions why the general injured someone he still needed to interrogate. The undead general, with a cold and distant voice, responds that the rule is clear: death for traitors. But he understands the protagonist's desire to obtain information, recognizing that he may have acted hastily. He apologizes for the abrupt introduction, stating that he was just following protocol, but admits that he could have spared the leader of the traitors so that she could be interrogated. The tension is still palpable, but the protagonist, maintaining control of the situation, orders his commander to heal the injured girl. He knows that the information she has is valuable, and that there is still much to be discovered about the conspiracy that was underway. The undead general, in turn, watches the scene with an impassive expression, awaiting the demon lord's orders, ready to act as necessary. The protagonist watches carefully as the traitors try to negotiate for their own survival, offering their souls in exchange for power. They ask the protagonist to transfer part of their magical energy, claiming that this would be enough to complete some kind of ritual. Suspicious, the protagonist questions the exact purpose of this transfer of power, but the traitors only respond that what is necessary is to keep one of them alive so that they can complete the process. The protagonist's assistant, realizing the manipulative nature of the traitors, intervenes, reprimanding the protagonist for considering such an offer without questioning their intentions. She reminds him that, as the new demon lord, he has the power and authority to decide the fate of everyone present, and that he must act with prudence and wisdom. At this moment, the undead general, who until then had remained silent, decides to test the protagonist's strength. He points his bone sword directly at the demon lord, challenging him to a duel to prove whether he is truly worthy of his title. The protagonist, exhausted and with his reserves of magical power almost depleted, knows he cannot refuse. The general, imposing and immortal, warns that the duel will be a test not only of strength but of determination. Despite the disadvantage, the protagonist accepts the challenge. He prepares for battle, knowing that this fight could decide not only his fate but the future of everyone who depends on him. The general advances with impressive power, his bone sword glowing with dark energy. The protagonist's sword begins to crumble under the pressure of the general's attacks, but he does not retreat. In the midst of combat, the protagonist reveals a strategic ability. He materializes another sword from his storage, surprising the general with the quickness of his response. When the general tries to teleport behind him, using auxiliary magic to gain a logistical advantage, the protagonist is already prepared. He conjures more swords, revealing that he has registered an entire weapons store, with over 100,000 swords ready to be used. The protagonist's assistant, although impressed by her master's cunning, is worried about the kingdom's finances. She warns him that if he continues breaking so many swords, it could further damage the finances, which are already strained by the costs of rebuilding the kingdom. The undead general, realizing the protagonist's determination and cunning, momentarily retreats, recognizing that the new demon lord may be more formidable than he initially appeared. He praises the protagonist's ability to adapt and face challenges, but makes it clear that the test is not over yet. The battle is far from being decided, and both the general and the protagonist know that much more is at stake than just a demonstration of power. With one last burst of energy, the protagonist advances again, determined to prove that he is worthy of the title of Demon Lord, not only for his raw power, but for the intelligence and courage he has demonstrated so far. The duel continues, with every move, every blow, a battle for survival and the honor of everyone involved. Then, the battle between the protagonist and the undead general intensifies, with each blow reverberating through the room like thunder. With each attack, the protagonist feels the crushing pressure of trying to contain his opponent's immortal strength. Sword after sword crumbles in his hands, broken by the intensity of the general's attacks, until, in a moment of pure brute force, the protagonist is thrown backward, colliding violently against one of the walls of the room. The general, with a sadistic smile, advances quickly, determined to end the fight once and for all. He notices the protagonist's defensive posture and, with a mocking tone, asks why he doesn't attack head-on. "Why do you hesitate?" the general provokes. "I am immortal. Your attacks are useless against me, and you know it." He advances once more, his attack charged with an almost arrogant confidence. "You are still very young and inexperienced. If the former demon lord were still alive, she would have defeated me by now." But suddenly, the protagonist disappears from view, moving with an almost supernatural speed. The skeleton, for a brief moment, loses the protagonist's location, but quickly teleports behind him, trying to surprise him with the hell blade. The audience watching the fight holds their breath when they see the blow hit the protagonist, believing that he has been defeated. However, the attack was just a distraction, a trick to force the general to reveal his true strategy. With a cold look, the general reveals his true plan. He used his subordinates to drain the protagonist's magical energy throughout the fight, gradually weakening him. "Did you really think you could defeat me in a direct confrontation?" he scoffs. "I've been stealing your energy from the beginning. Now, you're nothing more than a shadow of your former self." The protagonist, exhausted and with his energy reserves almost depleted, stands firm, his eyes shining with determination. He knows the general is partly right. He can't win this battle with brute force alone. His mind races with possibilities, trying to find a way to turn the tide. At this point, the general mentions the former demon lord, referring to her as a woman who succumbed to her own emotions, becoming a brutal figure focused only on her personal ambitions. "She was strong, yes, but it was her obsession with power that destroyed her," says the general. "You are just as weak as she is, letting your emotions rule your actions." Suddenly, a figure appears in front of the protagonist, intercepting the general's imminent attack. She is one of his most loyal subordinates, trembling with fear but determined to protect her master. "That's enough," she screams, her entire body shaking with tension. The general, surprised, observes the scene with a certain cruel fascination. "Lovely," he murmurs. "You are indeed loved by those around you. But you are wrong. These are not peaceful times, and gestures like this will not save your master." Despite his words, the general hesitates for a brief moment, as if pondering what it truly means to be a leader. The protagonist, still standing despite his fatigue, notices this small window of opportunity. He takes a deep breath, focusing on the last of his magical energy and his subordinate's words. He knows he cannot allow her sacrifice to be in vain. Gathering all his remaining strength, the protagonist prepares one last move, an attack that depends not only on raw power but on strategy and cunning. He realizes that to defeat an enemy like the undead general, He will need to do more than just survive, he will need to be smart, to use the general's own arrogance against him. The battle continues, but the protagonist is no longer the same. Now, he fights not just with his sword, but with the wisdom that comes from experience and with the knowledge that, to protect those he loves, he is willing to go beyond his own limits. The tension in the air is palpable as the protagonist prepares to show his true strength. He knew that, to win the undead general's loyalty, he would need to demonstrate a power he had not yet revealed. His subordinate, observing the scene, was confused and worried, but the protagonist reassured her, asking her to step back and take a deep breath. He was grateful for their courage and sacrifice, but he knew the battle was far from over. With firm steps, the protagonist advanced toward the skeleton, as if nothing could stop him. With an almost carefree gesture, he raised his arm, announcing that he was about to release a power that the general had not yet witnessed. In a sudden movement, he used an invisible force to grab the general and threw him with colossal force, throwing him far away. The general, surprised, tried to react, but the protagonist was already prepared. "Do you think you can beat me with tricks?" the protagonist asked in a calm but authoritative voice. He then conjured a fire arrow with terrifying intensity, shooting it towards the general. The arrow cut through the air, burning with an overwhelming fury, but the general, although impressed, realized that this would not be enough to guarantee his loyalty. However, the protagonist wasn't just biding his time, he was preparing something much bigger. He began reciting an arcane chant, invoking a special magic that transcended anything the general had ever seen. "O incandescent red fire, O scorching heat, flames that rise from the depths of hell, burn the sky and bring purification to the world." With those words, he released magic so powerful that the entire sky was lit up by a gigantic explosion. The glow was so intense it could be seen from miles away, as if the sky itself was on fire. The undead general, observing the devastation, was momentarily stunned. "What is that?" he muttered, unable to believe the magnitude of power the protagonist had just unleashed. The protagonist, with a resolute expression, calmly replied, "You said horrible things about me, General, but my true desire is to end this war without anyone else needing to die. I do not seek power for power's sake, but peace for all. Even if it means sacrificing my own life, I know it's the right path." The general, confused and impressed, began to realize that the protagonist was not like the other demon lords he had served. He was not driven by a thirst for power, but by a genuine desire to protect everyone, including his enemies. The protagonist reached out to the general, offering him a choice: continue fighting or join forces to achieve a greater goal. After a moment of hesitation, the general finally spoke, his voice filled with newfound respect. "I cannot fully measure what you represent, but I see that your strength is real and your desire for peace is true. From now on, I will wield my sword at your side. However, know that while there are doubts about your ability to lead, I can always challenge you again, even for the title of Demon Lord." The protagonist nodded, understanding the nature of the agreement. He knew there was still much to be done, and that his position would be constantly questioned. However, he also knew that he now had a powerful ally at his side, someone who could help lead his kingdom into a more peaceful future. As the dust settled, the beastmen, who had observed the entire battle, began to mutter among themselves. Finally, one of them stepped forward, saying on behalf of the others, "It's all right. We will support you, not just because of your strength, but because we believe you can truly bring the peace we all desire." The protagonist, tired but determined, realized that this was just the beginning of a new era. An era where he would have to continue fighting, not only against external enemies, but also to prove himself worthy of the trust of those who chose to stand by his side. Then, we head towards the castle, where the demons were immersed in a lively conversation about the flow of magical power that was present within them. At that moment, they were not sleepy, as the magical energy kept them alert and active. We decided to add an extra task for that night, patrolling around the castle. The night watch, far from making them drowsy, seemed to keep their sense of duty sharp. However, there were rumors circulating about the presence of a ghost that appeared exactly during the night they were patrolling. If someone walked through the uninhabited corridors at that hour, as they were doing, it was said that they would mysteriously hear strange and unsettling footsteps. As they advanced through the corridors, footsteps began to be audible. They were frightened by the growing and approaching sound. When they turned to investigate, they ended up screaming, surprised and stunned. They fell to the ground, stunned and unaware of what had happened. The demon lord, worried about the commotion, asked the demons about their responsibilities and what had happened. We then jump to a training scene. The protagonist was intensely involved in a training session with his subordinates. He explained that determination should be the center of gravity of his movements and that practice did not allow distraction from the opponent's movements. When the opponent advanced, it was crucial to react even more quickly. If the protagonist fell, he emphasized that a powerful counterattack was essential and that there would be an opening opportunity to be seized. During training, one of the subordinates jumped on the protagonist, who observed the huge difference in skill. She, although defeated and exhausted, argued that it was not possible for there to be such a disparity. Despite her obvious fatigue, she was becoming significantly stronger. The protagonist, impressed with her progress, expressed that he didn't expect her to grow so much, merely identifying his own weaknesses. As the protagonist ran his hand through her hair, he noticed something strange. There was a mirror there, a detail her assistant had mentioned earlier. The assistant had warned about problems that had arisen, but the situation was far from being completely resolved. Then, they head towards the imposing castle, whose ancient and majestic structure rises before them. The assistant, with a tone of voice that mixes concern and knowledge, mentions that she heard about the story of the ghost that supposedly haunts the place. The protagonist, with a thoughtful expression, confirms that the subject is relatively recent and that the problems related to this entity have increased. However, the true identity of the person responsible for the disturbing events still remains an enigma. When they arrive in front of a heavy and ornate door, the assistant observes that it appears to be the place where the ghost appears most frequently, possibly a drawing room or an important reception area. Although they initially do not perceive any supernatural presence, a feeling of unrest permeates the environment. Suddenly, they detect the presence of active lethal magic. The assistant urgently requests the creation of a resistant barrier to protect herself. The protagonist, embarrassed, apologizes for having let his guard down and for not having noticed the magical openings in the environment. To face the threat, it appears that everyone will need to use their individual magical abilities effectively. Suddenly, a complex magic circle forms beneath the protagonist's feet, and he is thrown violently towards the ground. Confused and alarmed, they try to understand what is happening. The protagonist, trying to communicate with his assistant, discovers that communication is blocked by an invisible magical barrier that restricts his capabilities. He realizes that the barrier is affecting his very existence and presence. At this moment, a mysterious figure appears behind the protagonist. It is a completely naked young woman who appears out of nowhere and greets the protagonist with a tone of voice that mixes irony and familiarity, calling him a devil. The protagonist, stunned and surprised, looks at the naked young woman and immediately tries to cover his eyes, struggling to process the situation. He asks in an embarrassed and confused voice who she is and, more urgently, requests that she get dressed. The protagonist's reaction reveals a state of profound perplexity and discomfort, an unexpected side of his personality that he was not used to showing. He wonders if he is actually developing inappropriate affection, or if the situation is just an emotional shock. The young woman, noticing the protagonist's discomfort and the awkward situation, quickly gets dressed. She asks if he is okay and explains that she spent a significant amount of magical power to materialize before him. She worries about the fact that she used so much energy to appear and hopes that the protagonist understands the situation. Then, the protagonist, still confused and stunned by the unexpected presence of the naked young woman, asks who she is. She decides to repeat the question, as she realizes that he is the type of person who can easily forget the people he killed. Suddenly, an unsettling idea arises. Could she, in fact, be the demon lord who had been killed previously? The situation seems surreal, almost as if a child was wondering how he would have gotten into this astral form with just soul status. However, now, she appears to have the ability to interact in substantial ways, which makes her even more impressive and unsettling. The protagonist, still in a state of shock, listens to the young woman's words with a mixture of surprise and confusion. The young woman, observing his expression, realizes that the protagonist's reaction is a reflection of his true inner state. She seems intense and charged with complex emotions. The protagonist, with an expression of remorse and perplexity, admits that, yes, he was responsible for her death, and questions why she is acting this way. He wonders if he's apologizing to her, or if there's something else at play. The young woman, irritated and resentful, reveals that, frankly, the situation left her deeply tense. She mentions that, in addition to being killed by the protagonist, there are still many books she hasn't read and many ruins she hasn't explored. Her sadness is palpable, but despite this, she expresses a certain degree of gratitude to the protagonist for his efforts on behalf of everyone. She promises that, if necessary, she will do what she can to save the demon race, demonstrating a determination that contrasts with her apparent sadness. She reflects that perhaps it would be better not to tell the protagonist about the deeper details, as now he could dedicate himself even more to his work. She questions whether he is truly prepared for the responsibility of dealing with the demon lord's power, noting that he is hell-bent on doing anything except killing people. This determination is commendable, but it reveals a deeper desire for the protagonist to face and eliminate the gods. She explains that the battle taking place between the gods and the demons is complex, and that the world of humans is, in a way, interconnected with this fight, like a path that would take them closer to the heavens. The reason for this fight is that the gods gave humans the knowledge and weapons to face the demons, making them like puppets in a cruel game. This indicates that there are even deeper reasons and justifications for the need to eliminate the gods. Furthermore, the young woman reveals that there are more personal and emotional reasons for her demand. She mentions relatives and friends who were killed and states that revenge is an important issue. However, she also highlights the policy of not killing anyone in certain circumstances and suggests that the protagonist should be prepared for criticism from kind, well-meaning people who may not understand his actions. The protagonist, absorbing all this information and reflecting on the complexity of the situation, feels the weight of the responsibilities and choices he will have to make. He is prepared to face the criticism and challenges that lie ahead, but the path forward is uncertain and filled with difficult decisions. The time had come to get straight to the point and end the war once and for all. The plan included 4 crucial missions that needed to be completed accurately and quickly. The first mission involved power enchantment, something that seemed complex and vital to the success of the endeavor. The protagonist, intrigued, asks what exactly this entailed. The answer is that enchantment is a transfer of rights. Essentially, this means acquiring the rights to fly the demon lord's sword as well as a dragon, among other things that, in the demon world, are exclusively attributed to the demon lord. The young woman reveals that, in the name of demon lord Euretia, she approves the protagonist as the next demon lord. The protagonist, upon hearing this, becomes tense and perplexed. He asks if this is the entire ceremony, but before he can receive a clear answer, the young woman places her hand on the center of his chest, showing a bit of shame. The moment is fraught with embarrassment for both. Unexpectedly, the protagonist's hand passes through hers, and he finds himself with the ability to manipulate her. He notices strange glows appearing on his hand and wonders what they are. The young woman, still panting, explains that those sparkles are the symbol of the demon lord and that they represent the key to activating the demon lord's final defense mechanism and purgatory. She mentions that, as per the title, the sword would add a key, allowing him to truly become the demon lord. The protagonist feels a mysterious, albeit incomplete, energy and realizes that this power seems to have been lost in the battle against the gods. Fragments of power have been scattered across the world, and now he must collect them. The second mission is to repair Purgatory, a critical task that could put his own life at risk. The situation is described as a curse that is manipulating war. The war is being conducted in a way that pits the weak against the stronger, using curses to turn people into spies. The top priority is repairing the swords, and this must be done immediately so the protagonist can engage on the battlefield. The third mission involves killing the gods, but there is still no clear information about their weaknesses. The protagonist must secure information on how to defeat them while continuing to collect the power fragments. He must also search for more information in the cathedral where the oracle resides. It looks like the protagonist will have to endure pain and suffering while searching for this crucial information. The young woman, who is now with him, appears to be recovering well after providing proof of the existence of the sword and the key. She is replicating her magical powers, and the protagonist is curious about how she came back to life. The young woman, after receiving some of the protagonist's magical power, is apparently alive again. However, the situation is confusing, as there is a feeling that she is still dead or that something strange is happening. The protagonist and the young woman wonder how she became what she is now, and this doubt hangs in the air as they try to understand what happened. The young woman continues to explain that the protagonist is the only one among them with a physical body. This means that his body is, in a way, mixed with hers, allowing him to touch her and gain power from it. She reveals that this mixture of bodies and powers is a fundamental reason why the demons are fighting the gods. This aspect is crucial to the demon's survival and success in war. However, as she speaks, her voice cracks, and she cannot make herself heard clearly. The protagonist, worried and confused, asks what is happening. She tries to explain that in order to protect the race of humans and escape the rebellion, they need to block any information that is inconsistent with their goals. This is necessary to ensure the existence and stability of the demon lord's role. The young woman mentions that the full story and details will be revealed in due time, and that, for now, he will need to wait to better understand what is happening. Despite the confusion, she tries to reassure him, saying that next time he will have a clearer understanding. The fourth mission is revealed to be something unexpected: loving someone. The protagonist, perplexed, asks what this means. The young woman explains that one of her priorities is learning to love someone. She clarifies that if he is unable to truly love, he may be betrayed again in the future. The importance of this love is compared to the value that can be found in life from a young age, but which is much deeper and more meaningful than anyone could imagine. She mentions that by demonstrating love and compassion, he will have the opportunity to save a group of travelers or even a simple family, and that this choice will reflect his true nature and capacity for love. The young woman points out that if the protagonist hesitates to accept this mission, it will suggest he is not comfortable with the idea of truly loving. She stresses that his primary goal should be to act heroically and develop meaningful bonds with others. Time passes, and the young woman observes that when she is next to the protagonist, their attraction and bond begin to weaken. This can eventually lead to betrayals and misunderstandings, which makes it even more essential that he understands the true brilliance and value of life before these consequences occur. The protagonist tries to understand the concept of the fourth mission and questions whether loving someone is really essential to understanding what is necessary. The young woman explains that, to protect everyone involved and ensure effective leadership, the demon lord must understand the minds and emotions of those around him. This means he cannot simply act heroically without considering the impact of his actions on others. Loving someone is a form of kindness and empathy that is fundamental to truly connecting with your friends and allies. This ability to love and understand others is what will gradually allow him to become a true leader and replace the previous demon lord adequately. She adds that these considerations are important because they reflect the true essence of what it means to be the demon lord. The young woman, whose name is Estella, is described as kind and enterprising, reflecting the type of spirit that the protagonist must try to understand and emulate. The protagonist, feeling frustrated and confused, asks Estella to stop talking that way, as he thinks she is just playing with his conscience and making jokes about such a serious situation. He is interested in understanding younger people and is not worried about the need to teach Lou something specific at the moment. His priority is to deal with the current situation and stop playing games that he considers inappropriate. Despite Estella's intense appearance, which still seems to carry a certain degree of purity and innocence, the protagonist wants to focus on practical and urgent issues. He recognizes that time is running out and that it is crucial to maintain magic and control over his physical body. The practical concerns and pressure to act quickly become more apparent as they continue to prepare for the next steps in their mission. The protagonist is instructed to call Estella whenever he needs anything in the future, now that he has officially recognized her. With this recognition, he will have a direct means of contacting her, facilitating communication when necessary. Despite this understanding, he experiences an uncomfortable feeling, as if he were being manipulated or used by Estella for some specific purpose. Still, he expresses his gratitude for the guidance she provided him, acknowledging that the direction and advice he received were crucial to his understanding and progress. He is determined and confident in his ability to love someone as instructed, and he is prepared to go to great lengths to accomplish this mission. Estella promises that she will do everything in her power to find someone who can live up to expectations and who can contribute significantly to the cause. She commits to supporting the protagonist in carrying out this task, showing her commitment and dedication to helping with whatever is necessary. After this conversation, the protagonist leaves the magical barrier he was facing. His assistant, with an expression of mixed concern and relief, calls him and expresses her apprehension about the situation. She reveals that, upon further analysis of the magic involved, she discovered that it was the magic of the former demon lord. This clarification somewhat reduces her initial concern, as the situation now seems more understandable and less threatening than it seemed at first glance. The protagonist mentions that he found Estella in the astral state and that what she told him served as an essential guide for the future. He reflects deeply on the advice of loving someone and what it really means for his journey. He realizes that Estella's soul is still present in that specific room, which explains the vision beyond the normal limits of physical space. For this reason, he decides that the room will be reserved as a private space for the demon lord, a place of special importance. Furthermore, the protagonist makes the decision to move the entire bookstore to this room, following his own reorganization order. He expresses his gratitude to the assistant for her support and help during this process. Although he is not completely sure of the consistency or logic behind his actions, he hopes that the assistant and others around him are satisfied with the changes he has made. The protagonist is aware that there are still many tasks and challenges to face, and everyone expects him to continue to fulfill his responsibilities and overcome obstacles as he progresses on his journey. Estella then creates a path between dimensions, allowing the protagonist a direct view of a portal that opens to the human world. He asks if it would really be that easy to travel to the human world this way. Estella, with a tone of confidence and humility, responds that the reason it is possible is because of her exceptional abilities. She is, indeed, a remarkable figure, and her clairvoyance, along with her vast experience and in-depth study of the ancient demon lord, gives her a special title of Vision. This powerful magical ability is what makes it possible to open portals and travel between dimensions with such ease. She explains that while in the human world, it is possible to open portals in places that have a dense concentration of magical power. However, this cannot be done anywhere, as the magical power must be sufficient to sustain the opening of the portal. Estella reveals that due to the Braves' retaliation and the absence of a skeleton, the demonic invading force was forced to retreat from the human world during this period. The demonic units are left behind, and now is the time to intervene and save them. Furthermore, it is the opportune time to gather information about God and find the demon lord's sword fragments. The reason why only the two of them are involved in this mission is because the protagonist didn't tell others about what he heard from the former demon lord. He fears that if he revealed this information, something terrible could happen, and it would be difficult to convince others not to resort to violence or kill anyone. Estella mentions that she has heard some things about God in ancient times, mentioned in ancient stories. However, she also reveals that she has additional information in some old books she studied. She explains that although God is known as a powerful and influential being, he is actually a type of manipulative mind that works behind humans, manipulating events and influencing human behavior in subtle and often hidden ways. With this revelation, the protagonist prepares for the next stage of his mission, aware of the importance of gathering crucial information and saving the remaining daimonic units while seeking to understand the true nature of God and his impact on the world. If what Estella said is true, the protagonist may not be skilled enough to face and kill God directly. Despite his determination, he knows that this task can be extremely difficult and that he will have to make a decision after gathering all the necessary information. One of the reasons for going to the human world is to find a sacred weapon, given directly by God, which could be crucial to facing even an entity as powerful as him. Many know the story that the death of the former demon lord was caused by a hero, which generates great concern about the potential danger and challenges that may arise. The protagonist decides to ask Estella for more details, but she doesn't seem to provide clear answers at the moment. So, they head to the human world and end up in the middle of a dense and apparently lifeless forest. The protagonist questions why they stopped in such an inhospitable place, and Estella decides to use a 3D map to guide their path. The protagonist observes the map and begins to trace the path they should follow. He notices that the demonic army, consisting of 278 soldiers, is spread across the forest and is heading towards the dimensional entrance located in the center of the forest. Meanwhile, the human army, numbering around 1,000 soldiers, is surrounding the forest. Furthermore, 160 brave soldiers are actively searching within the forest. Estella also detected two massive miraculous weapon energies in the eastern and western areas of the forest. These energies are likely associated with wielders of 4 sacred celestial swords. Therefore, it is possible that 2 of these sacred swords are located in the forest. With the mention of excessive power, it is clear that those involved are striving to regain their positions and resources, which indicates an intense and well-prepared battle. The protagonist's first priority is to defend the city and secretly neutralize the heroes present in the forest, without attracting the attention of the bearers of the sacred swords. He also plans to protect the path and rescue the injured along the journey. The protagonist trusts Estella's vision and her ability to guide them through this complicated situation. Estella, demonstrating confidence and determination, states that she is ready to face the challenges that will come and that her vision is aligned with the mission objectives. She is prepared to contribute her skills and knowledge to ensure the success of the operation and the safety of everyone involved. So, they create a magical shield to protect themselves as they advance through the forest. The protagonist is prepared to face whatever is coming. A thick fog begins to spread across the area, and Estella comments that it is exactly what she expected, praising the protagonist's preparation. However, he feels uncomfortable being praised for a power that is not really his. He feels awkward and out of place, as if the recognition is not fully deserved. Meanwhile, the surrounding heroes begin to realize that the situation is becoming increasingly strange. One of the heroes, suspicious of the presence of magic or a demon nearby, warns his companions to be careful. However, before he can finish his sentence, his sword suddenly breaks due to a cast spell. The protagonist, agile and fast, appears right behind the hero and knocks him out, ensuring that the threat is neutralized. His assistant, observing the scene, reflects that her clairvoyance could have revealed the enemy's blind spots. If she had collaborated with the former demon lord in the last battle, the victory would have been even more decisive. After dealing with the situation, they continue their journey through the forest. They run and treat the injured, including allies and skeletons, as they advance according to the map. In the middle of the night, they stop to rest. Everyone looks exhausted, especially the protagonist's assistant. He is surprised to discover that despite being demons and their reputation for transcending humans in many ways, they still need rest and sleep, which contrasts with his previous perception that demons do not require this type of rest. He asks if she has any stamina or need for food, and she confirms that she does. Grateful, she eats some of the food that the protagonist prepared, praising the meal and highlighting that it was delicious. She mentions that the food there is much tastier than what they are used to having in the demon world, highlighting the vibrant difference and superior quality of the food in the human world. Estella is a little surprised by this difference, which makes her appreciate the experience even more. The protagonist asks if this is her first time in the human world, and she confirms that it is. She explains that due to the forced invasion, demons specializing in combat, such as immortal beasts or magicians, rarely have the opportunity to visit the human world. In contrast, humans are never seen in battle, which makes her experience even more unique. He asks her what she thinks of the human world, and Estella responds that, although she finds the world a little inappropriate for her conditions, she is fascinated by the experience, the beauty of the trees, and the magnificence of the sky. She describes the scenery as extremely colorful and beautiful, and this sight makes her feel a special and enchanting feeling. The protagonist shares this feeling, thinking that, when everything is over, they will be able to live together in this vibrant world. He reflects that perhaps her ears, which are different from those of humans, might cause some panic or strangeness, but Estella quickly assures him that this will not be a problem. She is optimistic and ready to face what is to come, while the protagonist continues to prepare for the next stage of his mission. So, Estella, demonstrating her skill, manages to hide her elf ears so as not to attract attention and asks to accompany the protagonist on any mission or location he goes to. After a period of rest, the protagonist manages to recover around 70% of his stamina, while Estella seems to have a slower recovery. In the midst of this recovery, they still need to face 6 braves who are located in the southeast area, and the protagonist ponders his ability to take care of himself properly in this situation. Estella informs him that there are 4 braves left, in addition to the remnants and the spirits that are still fighting. The demons are facing an all-out battle against everyone, and the executives of the skeletal units still remain on the field. The situation demands a decisive response, and they must take responsibility for what is to come. Estella mentions that the world is in danger, and they need to rush to help someone before it's too late. The protagonist tells Estella not to get up, as she is not in ideal condition for this task, but she insists on continuing. She argues that sometimes it is necessary to force oneself to prevent someone from dying and wonders if he has ever thought about that. She also remembers that she is an ally of the military academy, reinforcing that she must be saved. The protagonist, understanding the urgency of the situation and feeling guilty for having disregarded his abilities, apologizes to Estella. He then takes her in his arms and promises to carry her until she is sufficiently rested and recovered. They begin their race to help, with the protagonist carefully taking Estella. Meanwhile, another girl in the group is busy healing her allies and checking to see if they can still stand. She asks them if they are in a position to continue, and they confirm that they are. The environment is tense and the pressure is high, but everyone is determined to face the challenges and save as many people as possible. The protagonist and Estella continue moving forward with determination, aware that each moment is crucial and that their actions can make the difference between victory and defeat. They move forward, facing the dangers and trying to ensure that everyone can survive and overcome the obstacles that lie ahead. It was time to move on to the next phase of the mission. The protagonist, worried, asks what is happening and what Estella plans to do. She explains that she will move the staff away to avoid any accidents. When the protagonist looks back, He notices with horror that Estella has 2 deep holes in her back, showing that she was seriously injured. Immediately, he begins to run, feeling a wave of despair, knowing that all his magical power has been exhausted and that there is nothing left he can do on his own. He knows he needs to call for help, as the situation is critical. Shortly afterward, Estella is already lying on the ground, almost dead. One of the heroes, with a tone of authority, orders no one to approach her, declaring that it is better to end the situation from a distance. Estella, with a pained expression, mentions that she can't even feel her fingertips and, despite the severity of her injuries, it seems that she somehow managed to walk away calmly. Or at least, that's what it appears to be at the moment. At that moment, the protagonist and his assistant appear, fighting to protect Estella from the attacks. With desperate speed, the protagonist's assistant picks up Estella and one of her subordinates and transports them into the sky, flying to a safe location. Meanwhile, the protagonist remains on the battlefield, determined to face any threat that approaches. He turns to the situation and realizes that the fight is now against the Demon Lord, a battle that needs to be fought to save everyone who has been helped so far. He feels relieved that he was able to save so many people, but the cost is high, and he must continue fighting. The tensions are palpable, and the fight is far from over. Between the moments of chaos, the pirate, an ally who was nearby, asks who the person is with Estella. The assistant, still focused on her task, ignores the question and continues her work. The protagonist, already with a high level of stress and frustration, says that Estella should have done more to control the situation, also trusting in the support of others. He reinforces that assistance is crucial and calls Estella a celestial demon, a title that ends up scaring the captain who was observing. The setting is full of tension and action, with each character playing a crucial role in battle and rescue, fighting challenges and facing danger around every corner. The protagonist continues fighting with the hope that his actions and those of his allies can change the course of the battle and save those who are still in danger. After the intense battle, the two decide to join forces to cast powerful joint magic. The magic creates a swarm of arrows and swords that fly towards nearby heroes, breaking their weapons and preventing them from being killed. The battlefield is full of chaos and destruction, but the priority now is to ensure safety and prevent further deaths. After the fight, the protagonist turns to the captain and asks if she is still hurt. She, although grateful for the help, responds that she is feeling fine despite her injuries. She sincerely thanks him and mentions that the place will soon become a battlefield, which makes it clear that they need to move away immediately. She tries to say something more, but the protagonist interrupts her, asking her and her subordinates to leave quickly. The captain's subordinate mentions that she has not yet fully recovered and that her injuries are significant. However, the urgency of the situation demands that they return home as quickly as possible to avoid further danger. The protagonist asks if there is a chance to recover what was lost in battle. The subordinate informs him that the 2 sacred swords have been sacrificed and that they are moving towards the demons. With just 10 minutes until their arrival, the situation is critical and requires extreme caution. The captain mentions that they can feel the pressure of the 2 sacred swords that are coming towards them. To deal with this, it is essential to maintain a defensive position and be prepared for what is to come. At this moment, a hero advances with a direct attack against the protagonist. When the protagonist recognizes the hero, he is astonished to discover that he is his former student who had betrayed him in the past. He calls the student's name, and the student, upon hearing his former master's voice, expresses surprise and confusion. The student, now a hero, asks if the protagonist has changed sides. The protagonist explains that the events were complicated and that he was revived as a demon lord. He doesn't have time for a casual conversation about the past, as coping requires his full attention. The student, relieved and worried about the situation, mentions that he had hoped to become famous after defeating the demon lord, but that the rise of the new, stronger demon lord quickly became a hot topic everywhere. He laments that after burning everything, There was no evidence left that the ancient demon lord was defeated, and all doubts about his own story disappeared. The tension and shock are palpable as the protagonist and his former student face off, each struggling with their own motivations and challenges. The student, now a hero, reflected on his past and his choices. He had planned to go to the front lines to become a hero who recovered the 3 countries, but the appearance of the Sacred Edge stopped him from following that path. He noted that by pitting weak braves against demons, the demons appeared stronger, and then the heroes got credit for eliminating them. This tactical effort was ignored by the woman who, in the end, treated him as a mere supporting character. He felt like he was in terrible luck, but the reality became even more surreal when he discovered that the new demon lord was his former master. The contrast between his desire to be a hero and his master's imposing presence as a demon lord was a truly incredible development. He questions whether the protagonist is the same student as always, remembering the hero who, out of nowhere, saved his master from the clutches of the demon lord and brought peace to the world. The student wondered who could have done something so great. The protagonist asks if he is still the same student as before and hears the answer that the hero who appeared out of nowhere was the same one who brought peace to the world. The student reflects on the fact that the protagonist has always been like this from the beginning. The reason he became the protagonist's disciple was to discover the secret he was hiding from the beginning, demonstrating a miracle of weaponry power. He never expected that the initial training, which he found challenging, would result in such an intense confrontation. The student mentions that, although he surpassed the former demon lord and grew a lot, he always considered himself superior to the protagonist. The protagonist's audience notices the immense power emanating from the student and notes that the power he manifests is comparable to that of the demon lord himself. The protagonist's sword, which was already fragmented, seems to have been affected by this battle, and it breaks a little more. The assistant questions whether the student had really revealed that the demon lord's fragmented sword possessed such formidable power. The discovery makes the protagonist and his assistant question the true magnitude of this power and the impact it has on the ongoing battle. The protagonist's student advances with devastating force, creating a tornado that collapses on him. The protagonist, realizing the gravity of the situation, orders everyone to stay out of the fight. It was a problem he needed to face alone. He quickly summons a water shield, creating a 37-layer blue ocean barrier. This shield can block the initial attack, but the strength of the tornado is such that it paralyzes the magical structure. To contain the situation, the protagonist needs to use a rune shield. However, even the rune shield is not enough to fully neutralize the impact and ends up causing him pain. The protagonist's magic is rapidly depleting, and although his power is considerable, he cannot match the student's overwhelming power. Suddenly, the protagonist's student disappears and immediately reappears behind him, launching a direct attack. It challenges the protagonist to compare their physical abilities. The protagonist manages to dodge the attack with difficulty but is pushed back. Before he can recover, the student is on him again, pressing him down with a brutal attack. The new demon lord's strength is so overwhelming that it makes the protagonist look like a small fish in comparison. The protagonist realizes that his student's power has increased exponentially. However, he also notices that this increase in power is starting to fade. The effect of the demon lord's fragmented sword seems to be distorting the dynamics of the fight. The protagonist's assistant, worried, asks permission to enter the battle. The protagonist, however, believes that it is not necessary. He always thought the student saw himself as superior and stronger, and this was never a surprise to him. The student admits that his inferiority complex made him try harder and become stronger. He attacks the protagonist with uncontrollable fury. The protagonist tries to defend himself and counterattack, but the student's quick and relentless movements make any type of effective defense almost impossible. The student realizes that the protagonist's body is unprotected and lands a powerful kick to the stomach, followed by another to the chin. He continues to beat the protagonist, calling him weak and vulnerable. As the student advances, he tries to throw the protagonist to the ground. However, the protagonist manages to defend himself and counterattacks, throwing the student backward. The student, surprised by the protagonist's resistance, asks how he managed to react to such a powerful attack. The protagonist responds that even immense power can be ineffective in the hands of someone inexperienced. It reveals that the student has become linear and full of openings, making it easier to read and predict. The student, frustrated, expands his power even further, trying to overcome the protagonist's defenses. The fight remains intense, with each person trying to outdo the other in an epic battle that puts their skills and strategies to the test. The student realizes that his power, although great, has its limitations when used in a predictable way, and the protagonist tries to exploit these weaknesses to gain the advantage. The protagonist's student, his sword shining brightly, summons a dense mist that spreads between them. Determined to utilize the sword's full power, he reveals his intention to use his full strength, not caring what may happen. The protagonist, aware of the gravity of the moment, prepares for the inevitable confrontation. The protagonist, with fierce determination, launches a devastating attack. The student's sword breaks under the force of the blow, indicating imminent defeat. The student, now completely terrified, begs for mercy. He admits that he was wrong and that he didn't want to get to that point, begging the protagonist to stop, as he doesn't want to die. Despite the magnitude of the power he demonstrated, the protagonist chooses not to kill the student. Instead, he uses his magic to inflict intense pain as punishment. He imposes 2 rules on the student. The first is that he must not reveal what happened to anyone, and the second is that he must abandon his selfish ambitions and become a true hero, dedicating himself to helping others. The student, furious, protests against the rules, stating that he will not accept having his dreams destroyed. He believes he has already become a hero and has the right to seek revenge. He promises to become even stronger and seek justice in his own way, rejecting the end imposed on him. While the protagonist tries to touch the student's hair, expressing his disappointment with what he has become, something mysterious begins to descend from the sky. The assistant, alarmed, pulls the protagonist away from the student and warns him to stay away. The mysterious figure reveals herself to be a young girl named Ludmilla. She presents herself with an imposing aura and says that the fate of the protagonist and the student ends there.